And, like I said, I watched daily on TV in '84 and all. And then you get a chance, years later, he's competing at Mount Sac relays. And it's like, yo, that's Daley Thompson. And he's on the track running with you. He's giving you the business. And that doesn't happen. And like I said, where I grew up in Compton, Watts, the odds of me being a gangbanger and selling dope are higher than most anybody of me being an Olympian. You have to treat the race like it's a track meet. You're like, don't get caught up in the hype because it's all hype.
Yeah.
When you get there, that's all. It's all you see. The pomp and circumstance. Because you watch the Olympic Games over the years, you see the fireworks, you see the doves and the pigeons, and you just sophomore year. I spent my whole summer, as opposed to going back home, being in the hood, as we would call it, around my buddies who were those who were probably either selling dope in gangs. I had the opportunity to go to Europe, and I literally spent all my mid '80s after that running track and field in Europe. I mean, just being in the presence of Carl Lewis blew my mind because I was like, 2 years ago, I'm watching this guy on TV win 4 gold medals, and he's the incredible Carl Lewis. He just crashed and burned. But you're like, in my head, I'm like, how the hell that happen? That's Edward Moses, And I remember years later asking myself, I just have a question to ask you. What happened? He said, I came around the turn, the lane was puddled up. He said, as soon as I took off, and my body link took me forward over the hurdle, towards the hurdle, the light from the lights from the stadium hit the puddle, and just his angle of reflection and just blared him. He was literally blinded by the light. It's one of those situations where they don't see that sort of value in you. You won't be noticed, or if you're not doing something that's putting you in the paper or somewhere on television consistently, or you just don't have the voice of someone who go out there specifically and basically toot your horn or toot the horn for you. You get really, what they say, lost in the sauce.
Welcome to the conversation, Kevin Young. Kevin Young, absolute superstar athlete, world record holder, Olympic champion, one of the best hurdlers of all time. I hope I'm doing you justice with that, Kevin, on that side. So if I forgot anything, please jump in. If we start off today, though, relatively sort of loosely in terms of just, where you're from, how you grew up, then we'll just progress into the athletics and sporting side, if that's okay with yourself.
Oh, that's fine. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and child of the '70s, early '70s, born in '66, child of the '70s, and I grew up between Compton, California, and Watts, the community, which is a community in Los Angeles. Born in Watts, a year after the Watts riots of '65, so I was born in '66. I remember as a child moved to Compton, California, getting away from I would say South Central LA. Some formative years in Compton, grade school, a portion of middle school, and then I moved back to Watts and finished up middle school and high school. And being locally in Los Angeles, lived in, I guess, several small little neighborhoods throughout LA and Compton. So I've seen a lot, done a lot as a youngster, moving around through the city, watching it change. And I remember growing up early, I was just with the friends that I had growing up. We were always, kids running around and involved in sport. So my first love wasn't necessarily athletics. It was definitely basketball and American football, American football. And that was that. But I grew up as a little skinny little kid. So football was one of those situations where you just admired the sport because of being a fan of the sport itself.
Yeah.
And when you're playing ball in the street, you're always a particular player. You're either Lynn Swan or Charlie Johnson, one of the great receivers in American football. So growing up like that, but I remember I got introduced to athletics. Well, and another thing is just kind of growing up, just I would say with track. Before I even got introduced to track, it was more of a history lesson for myself, reading history books on the movement of in '68 with Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and knowing athletes or studying athletes such as Muhammad Ali, you know, uh, Jackie Robinson,
You had a real
Herb
passion
McKinley.
for sport in general, the
Yes,
history of
yes, yes,
sports.
yes.
Yeah,
Exactly, because when you're a young athlete, you're always flipping through the pages of books and magazines, and you see these
absolutely.
these individuals that you look up to, and I think that was basically my first love and introduction to sport itself. Listening to it on the radio, watching it on television. Growing up in middle school and high school, a big LA Lakers fan. I would say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was my favorite basketball player prior to Michael Jordan. I've always had an affinity toward Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Uh, just growing up in LA, being a huge Laker fan, and uh, that was always my thing. I remember just growing up in Watts, because my big transition. I remember when I was living in Compton, I was a big skateboarder.
Wow.
I had a buddy of mine. He gave me his skateboard. He had bought him a new skateboard. He had an older model. He had a Stacy Peralta wooden graphite tape precision wheels. And he said, "Cab, you want this?" Well, my nickname at the time was KK. KK, you want this? I said, "Yes, I want the skateboard." So we would go skateboarding all throughout the neighborhood. And we would find vacant swimming pools and these vacant homes and try to, carve inside the pools and all that. And then I never got the hang of all that, but I just loved just literally as a mode of transportation,
Yeah.
having a skateboard. And so that was literally, I remember when I moved back from Compton to Watts, matter of fact, I was the only kid on my block with a skateboard, and I would skate back and forth throughout the neighborhood, skateboard to middle school. Then I went to high school. I would skateboard from my house to the local high school, and I was just this odd, skinny black kid on the skateboard when everybody else, wasn't really into skateboards. Just a handful of us. So I remember and totally recall my first love of, I guess, being an active sport was me just kind of skateboarding and playing local basketball at the local basketball court up the street. So
So
those
we could
those are my
so
two passions growing up.
we could have lost you. I mean, obviously in those sort of areas, and obviously
You
you
could
look
have,
at it
man.
now with extreme sports, you'd have had a career in skateboarding these days. Obviously on
Yeah,
that.
I
So
mean, me and Tony Hawk pretty much the same age, and the things that
well,
he's done with that whole lane of skateboard, I applaud him. And so, and it's interesting because as a track and field athlete, me um, coming of age in that, um, watching how that played out, just seeing how, and you know this perfectly, how
yeah,
and I'm glad to bring in how the IOC went from watching the growth of extreme sports
yeah,
or street sports, and how the sport, quote unquote sport, slowly started falling into the Olympic program,
yeah,
both in the Winter Games and Summer Games. So just watching everything evolve, just watching sports itself evolve, it's has been incredible for me. But to go back into my growing up, I remember when I first got introduced into athletics, I was in the fourth grade, and I had a Miss Hilborn was just my grade school teacher. And during recess from class, we would go out on the field, and she just showed me how to do long jump and triple jump, and basically introduced me to the different disciplines of athletics
yeah,
as a fourth grader. And I think I first start off as a jumper. So, you know, as an athlete, a young athlete, the first thing you do is you try to figure out, who were the best jumpers at that time, whose profile is very prolific during that period of time. And I remember it was Dwight Stone in the high jump. It was Ty Peacock in the high jump. In the triple jump, it was Willie Banks.
yeah.
And those are
Legend.
the individuals that, you know, at the time as a young grade schooler, those were individuals that were participating on the international level that
Sure.
I was able to pick up the newspaper and read about. Um, and get a little bit of history about, because everything was a newspaper at the times. It wasn't, we wouldn't check it Google and things of that nature. And
Yeah.
so you really have to do your research on who these athletes were. So you were always in some sort of newspaper periodical, finding magazines and flipping through. And I remember just going, wow, if I want to be a good triple jumper, I would need to see what Willie Banks is all about. If I want to be a good high jumper, keep my eye on Dwight Stone and Ty Peacock and those guys. So I remember just having that sort of connection, early connection with athletics. And if it went from Miss Karen Hilborn kind of introducing that particular perspective of sport to me, I could say that I would probably, my drive and desire would probably want to be an NBA star, and Dr. J was another influence growing up early. Like I said, it was always those superstars of the sport at that moment that were the ones that kind of shown in the individual's eyes, like, I want to be like that individual. So those are my early heroes, sporting heroes, other than like the local phenoms were, Stones and Banks and Ty Peacock. Um, but then to evolve into an Olympian, years later,
Mm.
to meet these individuals or have a sort of connection with these individuals, that meant the world to me at the time.
So when you go from that sort of initial moment when you got your teacher really sort of introducing you to, sort of loosely as it were, to athletics, sort of the very infancy of just, this is what it is, see where you fit within it. If you look at what options, well, all the options are open to you, but I mean, you've touched on so many there. Obviously you've looked at the triple jump, you've looked at the high jump.
I was a jumper.
Let's be honest. Yeah, you chuck the long jump in there as well. If you there's no reason. And
It was, yeah, it was. I was, we started off with the long, like you said, it was an introduction of the jumps. This is the high jump. This is how you do it. And I remember we would have weekend competitions at the local high school. And I must believe this, I learned a lot of discipline from the introduction to athletics, because I remember a point in time where I remember participating in a race. When you're young kids always feel if you run barefooted, you can run a lot faster because you're light on your feet.
Yeah.
And I remember we would have these local meetings. So as a youngster, we would just sign up for anything and everything we can that particular afternoon. So I was in the 100-yard dash. I was in the high jump. I was in the long jump. I hadn't yet even did the hurdles at the time. But I can recall when I was about to run a 100-yard dash, and I took my shoes off, right? Because there was so many, heats of the youngsters in race, and I was in the line, and I took my shoes off. And I remember Miss Hilborn said, "No, you cannot compete with your shoes off. You got to run with your shoes on." And I was really upset because there was other young athletes running barefoot. She says, "No, the rules of the sport is you have to keep your trainers on."
Mm.
And I remember running the race, not running as fast as I thought I could have, and I was a bit disappointed. But I realized that the discipline of the sport really permeates the sports itself. And I recall, this is the interesting part. Then I remember going to the high jump, and I remember that I didn't know how to high jump, but the rules of the high jump was to clear the bar over 1 foot. And I literally recall running up into the bar and just jumping up, hurdling the bar, and I and I remember we would have these meetings every weekend. And so the big thing was always getting that colored ribbon. You get from the blue ribbon all the way down to with the yellow or the white ribbon. So it was like for every 8 places you had a different color ribbon. So I remember getting the brown ribbon. I think the brown one was 8th place. But it was always a gradual ascension to the colors. Always wanting to get that blue ribbon. And so that was like, this one week I got a green ribbon. I'm going for that blue ribbon next week. And that was like the impetus of like that drive.
Yeah.
That allowed me to listen to the coach and wanting to get better, because my perspective was, you have to build up and be better than you were last week in order to achieve what you, and that was my progression.
So you had at that age, a very early age, you had a real degree of awareness, I would say, in terms of patience and the bigger picture. And not, the reason I mention that is obviously just, just in terms of just the audience, understanding the journey, is that for somebody so young at that point in, just developing your career, to have patience and awareness at that point is not necessarily a given. Because if you think of a lot of people at any age, a lot of people are the opposite, when they become impatient. They throw the toys out the pram, because they're not getting the things that they want as quick as they want, or they can't understand it, or they don't really understand the full process or the bigger picture. So for you to actually really have that degree of awareness so early, but also have that level of sort of mindset and patience yourself to be able to go through that process, knowing, hey, but like you say, I think that's an inbuilt part in you, but also a part where you've actually put a lot of effort in to understand sports. And whilst you're doing that sort of research and reading up on sports, you're understanding the whole ethos behind sports.
When you develop into an athlete, because like some young athletes are just really gifted at their age, and they really shine. And I was always one of those individuals that I always had to put the practice in order to get it all out. And to your point, that was the root of my being patient, because I understood. One thing is I never had an issue with the discipline of working hard, because I always knew that I'm only going to, as much as I can put into it, that's what I'm going to get out. So I knew my abilities all resounded about me just kind of putting in the work. And when I realized that early on, and I'm the youngest of 7 kids, so being the youngest of 7, you learn how to be very patient,
Absolutely.
and you learn how to be very introspective as well. And you look at a lot, you kind of watch what the older athletes are doing, and you tell yourself, okay, if I do it this way, then I can evolve into that. And that has always been a part of my character, you would say, because like I said, when you're not the best, you want to do what it takes to become the best. I remember when as a hurdler, starting off as a hurdler, when I was doing the 5 steps, learning the 5 steps between the hurdles, before I was able to go 3 steps, because I was a high hurdler. That was my first 11 hurdles. And it was okay, establishing what a 5-step rhythm was. Am I going to hurdle off the left leg or the right leg? So that was an issue as a youngster. And then you start with getting to your comfort zone and say, okay, you start doing the 5 steps, knowing that eventually you're going to have to evolve into the 3-step, and having a coach that, just spending hours on the track, just trying to figure that out. And then once you accomplish that 3-step, or the world, the clouds just open up, the sun comes shining on you, and you're like, okay, because you realize that, it's definitely a process in which there's certain steps that you have to do. And if you don't have the discipline, you will really turn yourself off of the sport itself.
Within hurdling, and I'm no expert by any means, but within hurdling, over the years, having sort of watched quite a lot of it, you definitely hear about stride patterns a lot. It's more evident over the 400, isn't it? But 10 just goes so quickly, and it's just sort of so ferocious, if that makes sense. It's hurdles flying everywhere.
You watch these hurdlers, and as fast as they're going at their velocity, you wonder, okay, so where part of the race did they falter? And if you don't have the ability to go back and look at the footage, you would never know.
The thing with 110 is I think the start is everything. Not necessarily in terms of the speed, but in terms of the rhythm. Used to Colin Jackson for a long time, and Tony Jarrett, and I remember the races with Roger Kingdom and Tony Dees and Colin Foster and that old sort of Mark McCoy, and that sort of golden era of
I
suppose we had about
those guys.
Yes.
And check this out. Back decades ago, the thing in which how athletes used to start the hurdles were an 8-step stride pattern out of the blocks of the first hurdle. And you do have many hurdlers that still go 8 steps to the first hurdle. Now you have many hurdles that go 7 steps to the first hurdle as well. A lot of the championship hurdlers. And, so it's one of those situations where if an athlete has the ability to go 7 steps to the first hurdle and clear it, that's a plus.
Absolutely.
But the norm back in the day used to be specifically
Mm,
8 steps out of the blocks till you clear the first hurdle, and that's
yeah.
totally changed with men and women. Um, and so when you see races now, you look for little things like that. You know, how many strides did it take Aries Mare out of the blocks to the first hurdle? How many strides did it take the young Holloway out of the blocks to the hurdles? It's adjustments you have to learn how to make because you can get so comfortable going 8 steps the first hurdle
Yeah.
that you really don't want to attempt to doing it, especially in championship sort of competition.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember 8 steps to the first hurdle used to be the norm, but that's like one of the situations where if you have to do it, you'll do it. But if you don't have to, and you can go 7, adjust your blocks a certain way, come out of that longer extra stride length out of the blocks, and then with the turnover. I mean, I remember that was one of the situations which I had with the long legs, in which I had such a problem getting out of the blocks. I was such a giraffe, I guess you would say, laboring out of the blocks. But then once I got the momentum going, then I
Yeah.
can take seconds off and catch up with the pack. But it was always situations where I didn't catch up with the crowd until about the third hurdle.
Yeah.
You know, but you would see guys about a meter in front of me for the first two, hurdles 2 and 3, and then usually around 4 or 5, I'll catch up, and then it'll be a foot race to the end of the race.
So so for you, a very similar situation to a Carl Lewis scenario where essentially it was the second half of the race where he would pick,
Exactly. Anything
pick
after
up, wouldn't you
63.
really?
Oh man, it's so that's why when Bolt started racing, as
Yeah.
big as tall as he is, the way that he was able to match the leg speed of the shorter, because um, it gave those who watched that race a whole nother perspective to look at it now. Um, I think Bolt from his world record race, it's like 46 strides from the block to the finish line. And the race is so fast, like during the course of the race, you're not going to see that unless you, like we said earlier, you slow the footage down.
Yeah.
But he was a big man who was able to match the leg speed of the shorter sprinter.
See people that obviously their main asset was the start, and they're used to being so far clear by halfway, and then pretty much hanging on from there. Like you're saying, Carl Lewis's sort of days, it would be halfway, then you knew if he was relatively near, then it was all over pretty much.
He's gonna take
Yeah,
off. Yeah,
it'll probably obviously like the same for yourself, and whereas with Usain Bolt, it wasn't halfway. Unfortunately, it was like 1/3, and that's the difference of where he made the time. Is that he would be near enough level at 1/3 of the race gone, which
and then
means he
just
got no chance. Yeah, and that's
yes,
why like he was so far clear towards the end, is that he was just maintaining that speed, wasn't it? Pretty much, and like you obviously definitely know the great thing about, and this is what I'm going to come to with yourself, Kevin, is the difference is you've got to jump hurdles, and so
yes,
this is where and this is what I always find fascinating with hurdles. And 400 for me, it's got like a little bit of a soft spot in the heart, because I sort of grew up watching Ed Moses and that sort of era. And for me, Ed Moses is one of the most iconic sort of images and athletes of
yes.
all time, all generations for me. And I've had Daley Thompson over here and those types of things, but I always sit there and say, I just remember Ed Moses being so dominant in that sport and such an icon within athletics in general. And I just, the fascinating thing about 400 is the quicker you go is wonderful, but then it has an impact. It's fine if you haven't got hurdles, but then what happens if you're like you've done, when you've broke world records and you're going incredibly quick? That comes with a downside where, hold up,
Right.
I'm going incredibly quick today. This is amazing, but my stride pattern
You know
here
what?
is
The beauty of this conversation is the simple fact that we've seen the evolution of that race,
yeah,
especially in 2021. And I'm loving it
crazy.
as a hurdler. People that, um, what I love about the hurdles is if you are a true fan of the hurdles, you really don't make much comparisons of hurdlers, because you understand that each individual has their own abilities during the course of the race.
Sure.
Um, you know, I'm the I was before even this call we're having. I was telling myself, said like, wow, you actually, you held the world record for 28 years. Um,
I feel like I should
And,
stand up and
and,
give you a round of applause for that, Kevin.
right, right. And folks, they have a tendency, and obviously folks want to make comparisons with athletic figures. And I said, there's no way you can compare me to Edwin. There's no way you can compare me to Karsten. I mean, because Edwin set the measuring stick of how to run the race, and the blueprint basically for everybody. And watching him compete, you all as a young hurdler, was always a situations where I just wanted to be able to run as efficient as he raced,
Yeah.
And somehow figure it out for myself. And I was when I finally did that, I was like, wow. Now I felt that I was able to, took what he's done and pushed myself to a level in which he had already mastered. So
Yeah.
I never looked at I've never looked at me breaking Edwin's record. I've only looked at it me establishing my own record.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just as when Carson established a new world record in the 400 hurdles, because I would never, and early on I remember, I would always say, shatter, in print, shattering the record of Edwin Moses, but that was only in print. In mine, I would always tell myself, no, I just established my record. I said, because there's no way in my mind, in my head, I can um, dispel 47.02 seconds. I could never do that. So I would, as I gotten older, I realized of the phenomenal person that Edwin was over this period of time. And it's simply amazing. But the beauty of it is the fact that I was like, wow, of all individuals on the planet, I had a moment in time that I've been able to share, because Edwin knows what it felt like to be the best in the world in a particular event. I was able to push myself and tell myself, I was categorically the best in the world in a particular event.
Yeah.
Now Karsten, now he's the best in the world in that particular event. And same thing with Dave Hemry and all these other great hurdlers from the past,
Yeah.
Akibu and those guys. I was like, it's a certain feeling that you have, your own personal emotional attachment you have to pushing yourself to your own personal abilities, outside of whatever sort of finite category in which spectators try to place the event itself in. As a spectator watching a series of quarter milers, Butch seems to just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Which just, because I guess I was so focused watching, Daryl Robinson and Cliff Wiley and Mark McCoy, and then Butch came out, and I'm like, where did this guy come from? And when he did come out of the woodwork, he was very dominant.
Did you ever get to train with Butch or any of the sort of 400 meters, sort of
Yeah,
guys?
well, I train on a daily basis with Steve Lewis and Danny Everett. Those are my teammates from the university. And so we were like brothers. We were all on the track. We're just, the competition is I bet you it's kind of like the relationship that Mike probably has with Deion Miner and the guys that he participated at Baylor, his teammates, Jeremy Warner, those guys. You get a particular comradeship, I would say, relationship with these guys that anybody that they put in the hard work. If you watched them train and fall out and throw up and cramp up and yell and scream, you go, okay. But overall, as a, and we I would say we've come from an era which we truly appreciate the contributions of the field of runners that were able to be the competitors in these races. Like I said, my favorite, another one of my favorite hurlers is Danny Harris. I've known of Danny since I was in high school, and he was the high school measuring stick when I was in high school. So it was like, if you're going to be like a hurdler, you need to be like Danny Harris, or just not necessarily be like him, but just know who he is.
Yeah.
You cannot be like him, but you got to know who this guy is, because that's how phenomenal he is. And it went from Danny, And like Edwin was always, he was always on top of the mountain. But you come down the mountain and you see Danny, and then Danny is competing with the guy on top of the mountain, and he's just a year or two older than me. You're like, yo, that's I mean, so my evolution as a hurdler has always been watching and knowing um, the greatest hurdlers at that time, and just being able to compete with them.
You weren't just fixated on sort of Edwin at the top of the mountain, if that makes
No,
sense. You had no, but it's very easy for, and don't get me wrong, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have your eye on the prize that high, but there's a lot of pitfalls if you don't have the small steps to be able to get to that top. Because
when I was able to race against Danny in college, it gave me the marker that I was able to be a world class athlete, because I already knew Danny was world class when he took the silver medal in '84 um, as a freshman at Iowa State. So when I go to my first national championships, and able to just simply able to line up next to him on the track, to be, I remember just telling myself, wow, I'm in a race with the silver medalist from the 1984 Olympic Games. Who would
blows your
ever thought
mind.
that I would who would ever thought that I would be right here, you
Yeah.
know, and just able to compete with the guy. And the most interesting thing happened, I remember in that particular race, was the fact that I knew that I was running against Danny just totally threw me out of my whole step pattern during the course of that race, because that was like the very first, when I raced against him, it was the first time I ever went 11 steps between a hurdle, because it was a out of mind experience
Yeah.
running against this guy. The gun goes off, and in my head I know what he's capable of doing because I've watched him do it. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, let me just run and see how far I can take this.
Yeah.
During the course of the race, I go 11 steps between a hurdle. And I didn't know I did it, but I know I'm running against the silver medalist from the '84 Olympics. You
Yeah.
know, that was my claim to fame. And then to take second place behind him at the national championships, it was never nothing to be ashamed about. So many athletes that always feel that they have to win a race. I'm like, dude, I'm in the race. I mean, that was the beauty of running in the mid '80s, and actually the luxury of being on Santa Monica Track Club at the time, because Carl was like, the number one athletes in the world were Carl Lewis and Edwin Moses, um, you know, Cole and Cram and those guys. Internationally, you
Yeah.
start naming the athletes. And I remember there were times in which, these meet directors and organizers wanted Carl in these races, and he was a big leverage for me, because it was situations in which he would say, well, I knew I was in, and think about it. They used to have the B races and C races. They did. They had a whole track and field athletics program that allowed the span of 300-meter races, 400-meter hurdle races. They could pick and choose. And I remember it was races in which I was in the C race, where they had three
Mm.
rounds, and Carl would, based upon my progression, it'd be guys that be in the A race that may have had a slower time, but they've been running on the circuit for a number of years. And these meet managers and the agents had these relationships, so they were able to get their guys in these races. And
Mm.
Carl would be like, well, he would say, well, I'm not going to run the 100 unless Kevin gets the lane,
Oh,
stuff
wow.
like that. And because I would be in the C race and I'm fine. I'm like, I'm good. I'm racing. I'm here in Europe running,
Yeah.
and next thing you know, I go to the call room. So instead of being in the C race, I'm lining up. I may be in lane 8 or 1, but I'm in the race with the big dogs, and I'm like,
Yeah.
when did this happen, right? And then I find out that I got an opportunity to get into the big race, and it was one of those situations where I was able to have a go at it with those guys, and just kind of
But you
have that
learn so
opportunity.
much. You learn so much through
Oh
those
my God,
races.
so
Yeah.
much. Uh, I remember I never forget. It was in Paris. I think it was on a Thursday, July 17th, I believe, 1986 or 87. Um, that had been 86. No, I remember running a race. I ran 50 flat, 50 point. It was a race in which I was in lane 8, gun goes off, I'm running, and as I got around the track, I'm in the race, Danny Harris in the race, Edwin Moses, Amadou Diaba, I think Nat Page, um, world class race. It's amazing. And I remember the gun goes off, and I just took the race out. I got caught at the 8th hurdle, but as the race went on, it started just raining a little bit while we are in the blocks. By the time we got to 250 meters, it was a downpour. And the wind was swirling in the stadium. And I'll never forget, I'm running, and Edwin takes the lead in the race. And then I remember running up behind him, and he just like flatlines. He just collapses in the race.
Wow.
And I end up taking, I believe, 3rd place in that race. I think Amadou Diaba won the race. I believe Danny was 2nd. I believe I was the 3rd, and then Dave Patrick. But Edmund was winning the race. And what happened was, the way the stadium was set up, came around the turn, in his lane, it puddled up. And the stadium lights, they shone at an angle on the puddle. The puddle reflected into his eyes. It was the craziest thing, because he was just in stride, and all of a sudden he just hit a hurdle and
Wow.
just crashed and burned. But you're like, in my head, I'm like, how the hell that happened? That's Edwin Moses,
Yeah.
And I remember years later asked him, I said, I just have a question to ask you. What happened? He said, I came around the turn, the lane was puddled up. He said, as soon as I took off, and my body lane took me forward over the hurdle, towards the hurdle, the light from the lights from the stadium hit the puddle, and just his angle of reflection, and just blared him. He was literally blinded by the light, and took the hurdle and literally crashed and hit it. Fell into on the track. It's downpour now. And I'll never forget, he gets up, and that's all I remember. After finishing the race, he gets up and walks off the track. And I just remember all the photographers just taking pictures, those flashes going on everywhere. Because everybody's shocked that he fell in the race, but no one knew why he fell.
Yeah.
Like
he wasn't injured, really, wasn't it?
Exactly. Oh, it was. I mean, it was. And that's one of the things that, as a hurdler, you have to consider.
In terms of your career, Kevin, obviously, you've achieved so much. You've competed against so many, and to ask for highlights would be wrong. But if I start sort of loosely in terms of your first Olympics, what was going through your mind?
It was in my case, prior to the Olympics, I remember being in high school telling all my friends that I was going to be an Olympian. And so the first conversation was, I'm going to make, after watching the 84, it was crazy, because this is the most interesting part about it is, my senior year in 84, it was a few things that I wanted. I wanted to go to University of Southern California, USC. Growing up in LA, that was the prime university I wanted to go to. I wanted to be an Olympian. And those were the stepping stones. I didn't know how I was going to get there, because I thought I was going to be a basketball star, but I knew I wanted to be an Olympian. And then when I saw the 84 Olympic Games, I had won a scholarship. I had won $1,000 scholarship, and it was called the Coca-Cola Future Olympian Award. And it was the local bottling company, the Los Angeles bottling company. They had some community service money that they had. And so it was one of their, I guess, social responsibility things. I don't even think that word was even being used in 84, but that was their thing. So they had a scholarship for athletes to be selected. And you had to have a certain grade point average. And you had to have some sort of athletic prowess. And I had filled out the forms and did everything, and I won the scholarship. I was the 1984 Coca-Cola Future Olympian Award winner, and that award, you got the award was $1,000, as well as you had the opportunity to be a volunteer at the LA Olympics. and I was actually had the volunteer spot. I was on the hurdle crew. So my job would have been to bring the hurdles out for the high hurdles and the intermediate hurdles. And I got the Converse polo with the khakis, with the beige khakis and the Converse trainers on to go out there every day to be in the Olympic Games with the credential and all.
Superb.
But I couldn't. I had I got did not get accepted at USC, so I was pissed off. And so I had got a summer job at Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena that I had to drive past the Coliseum over the summer every day during the Olympics to get to Pasadena to go work at JPL. Um, but going through the traffic, passing, getting to Pasadena, and coming back during rush hour traffic, getting home. The biggest thing was to get home and click the television on. Uh, First to watch the Olympic trials and the U.S. Olympic trials because they were held at the Coliseum, and then to watch the games when all the international athletes showed up. And so that was like the biggest thing. And watching, then of course, Carl Lewis wins the 4 gold medals. He's the man.
Yeah.
So he is the poster child of Olympics, of track and field in the world. I don't make it to SC, but my B plan, I end up going to UCLA. And so I go from South Central LA all the way to West LA, which I've never really hung out in. So it was like night and day. Um, so I had to get acclimated to being on the west side, on that side, that part of town, being nestled into Beverly Hills and Brentwood and Bel Air Estates, and just be. And I'm like, this campus is amazing. So it was one of those situations where I went from going to, went from the possibility of going to USC and being real close to home, get on the bus, go home, and deal with that element because SC wasn't the SC area that it has evolved into at the time.
Mm.
So I get to UCLA fall of '84, and I pretty much see half of Team USA training on that track. And I was a walk-on the team because, like I said, I was hoping to get a scholarship, and I didn't. And the only scholarship that I got was $1,000 from the Coca-Cola Future Olympian Award, and then the summer job money that I earned working at the Jet Propulsion Lab. So when I got to UCLA in the fall, I was like, okay, I'm here on campus, so now I got to go try out for the team. But the beauty of it was I got a chance to see, like I said, pretty much half of Team USA training, all of Bobby Kersey's athletes. And there's a few other international coaches or world-class coaches who had athletes training, but the majority of them, you had FloJo and Valerie Briscoe, and Jeanette Bolden, and Jackie was on the team, and you had Al Jorner. You had and I'm like, I was like, I just saw all these athletes, competing at the LA Games. Now I'm like, I'm on the track and I'm literally rubbing elbows and shoulders with these athletes. So it was a situation where it was like the perfect storm for me to just be around watching world class athletes train because, like I said, we didn't even have a weight room in high school when I was there. So I got introduced to the sport where you had a training room where they'll actually wrap your ankles up and or they could put hot packs and cold packs on you and take care of you, give you massages and all that at the university. In my high school, they may, as the sport has evolved, you may get chiropractic and that sort of things, depending on what type of program you're in, but not at my high school. But I got to the university and it's on a whole nother level. And there's different levels because you see what the American football, with the college football players got and the basketball players got in their treatment. But to be able to be at UCLA at this time and era and watch these great athletes, I was like, wow, this is how you do it. And I was just starstruck, literally starstruck. So I was just literally glad to be out there. And then within 2 years, like I said, fall '84, I'm making the team for the '85 spring season. I think I go as far as conference championships, and then I took a summer job as a track as a camp coach, which I hated. And then it was a situation where it's like, Kevin, you got to improve. And I didn't know anything about all these national junior teams because I could have actually went to like the junior nationals, at least participated to make these, U.S. under 20 teams because I was, 18 years old. I could have done all that because I think as I got older, I realized that a lot of these athletes that I participated against, they had went to China, went to Japan as
Yeah.
junior athletes.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember seeing Usain Bolt did a junior Olymp. Did he do a
yeah,
junior
so
Olympics?
I
Yeah,
really, I really wasn't
yeah,
even tuned in to all that. And
yeah.
then, but my sophomore year, when I had an opportunity to run against Danny Harris, um, at the national championships, and I realized that I've gotten better. I think I won the conference, um, won the Pac-10 at the time. Go to NCs. I was runner up behind Danny at national championships in '86. So I got an opportunity to run internationally. And the most interesting thing was being there in at UCLA. They had the relationship with Santa Monica Track Club. So I had the opportunity to be a member of Santa Monica Track Club after my sophomore year at UCLA and traveling to Europe. Now, this is a time in LA where you had crack cocaine, all this gang violence. In '84,
Mm,
they started the gang sweeps in LA because LAPD figured they got all these foreign people coming into Los Angeles, and they had this gang problem from the cocaine era of the early '80s.
hmm.
Where folks were getting assaulted, robbed, and all this activity, and it was proportional to which part of the town you were on, and the fact that the games were at the Coliseum close to SC, where you had a lot of traffic in those areas, drug traffic and all type of prostitution along Figueroa and all this other stuff that's going on. If you look like what they consider a gang member, which was a pair of khakis and a t-shirt, which every young person wore,
Yeah.
it gave LAPD the opportunity to just grab you on whatever
Wow.
suspicion, whatever, lock you up, forget about you, as they call
Wow.
these gang sweeps that they did. I had so many friends of mine that got swept up in that, and as soon as after the Olympic Games were over with, they just got mysteriously released out of jail. But of course, once you're in those situations, you're out there fighting for yourself. So I had the opportunity to leave Watts and go to the West Side at
Mm,
UCLA and be in that be in Brentwood, Bel Air, and then my sophomore year, I spent my whole summer as opposed to going back home, being in the hood, as we call it,
yeah.
around my buddies who were those who were probably either selling dope in gangs. I had the opportunity to go to Europe, and I literally spent all my mid '80s after that running track and field in Europe. So I had this whole different perspective of a kid growing up in South Central LA, spending time flying into New York, going to New York to Heathrow to all over Europe, getting on trains, planes, and automobiles and hovercrafts. I remember I went to Malmo in Sweden. I was like, we flew in and got on a hovercraft, and I was like, wait a minute, we're on the water. It blew my mind that they had vehicles like that. And so it was just a learning curve for me for where I
Absolutely.
grew up. And every moment for me, I was pinching myself along the way. So for me to evolve, to go from '86 runner up in 400-meter hurdles to my junior and senior year, two-time NCAA champion in the hurdles. And so 1988, my senior year, I won national championships. I make the Olympic team by the skin of my teeth. It's a photo finish for third place. I beat one of my track and field heroes to squeak in. I beat I beat Danny and Dave Patrick to make the '88 team
Yeah.
with Andre and Edwin. And then I go to Olympics in Seoul. And I remember as a kid telling my mom, my mom had this attitude, and most parents do, was, you never get anything out of track and field. You might as well, get a real job, this, that, and the other. So in the back of your head, you're saying, yeah, I understand that, but this is one of my personal passion. So I remember my
Yeah.
mom telling me, don't put all your eggs up in this track and field thing. The reality is you're going to be working like everybody else, hopefully. But she was, my mom didn't come to a track meet of mine until college. Yeah, college. Yeah, to college. And maybe junior or senior year in college, she came to a track meet. But in any case, when she had an opportunity to travel to Seoul to watch me compete in the Olympic Games. That person was the biggest accomplishment that I had.
Yeah.
First, as a young man, to prove my mom, what you said, you're wrong. I told you I was going to make the team. Doing that, I said that to myself. I didn't mention it out loud, but the fact that she had the opportunity to travel over to Korea with me, to South Korea with me, to watch me participate, and then she met all these people that I knew. She
Yeah.
met Carl and his sister. Like I said, she's a track fan, but everybody looks at it from that, from their couch. It's never a situation where you're going to be in a person's face. So when I made the SMTC team as that sophomore for the summer, I mean, just being in the presence of Carl Lewis blew my mind, because I was like, 2 years ago, I'm watching this guy on TV win 4 gold medals, and he's the incredible Carl Lewis. Now we're
Yeah.
teammates. I'm a member of Santa Monica. I got the SMTC. I got the Mountains in the Sun. I mean, that was like the hottest T-shirt. You couldn't have no better T-shirt than the SMTC shirt, because selectively, you had to be a team member to get it. And then eventually, I think Nike, Foot Locker ended up selling the shirts in the stores commercially. But it's one of those situations where certain things in my lifetime, I have an affinity towards. One was the SMTC T-shirt or uniform, all that. Second was being a member of Team USA, and you got the Kappa uniform, because that was the only way you're going to, at the time, you're going to wear Kappa. You have to make the USA national team for world championships, for the Olympic Games. And so now, fast forward all these years, Kappa commercials are selling their sweatsuits, and we know in the U.S., whenever you saw somebody with a Kappa sweatsuit, you knew he or she had to
Yeah.
be this great track and field athlete. And so those are the little signals. And I was a part of that evolution of the sport. And then to watch Cole and Cram, Edwin, and I remember when Daly and those guys used to come to the States. They had to meet at Mount San Antonio College at Mount Sac. And those guys used to be, and like I said, I watched Daly on the TV in '84 and all, and then you get a chance, years later, he's competing at Mount Sac relays, and it's like, yo, that's Daly Thompson, and he's on the track running with you. He's giving you the business, and that doesn't happen. And like I said, where I grew up in Compton, Watts, the odds of me being a gangbanger and selling dope are higher than most anybody of me being an Olympian. Like, you went from a walk-on to the world record holder in the 400-meter hurdles. That's my bookends.
It's a bigger picture, isn't it?
I'm totally fine with that. And then you start, we can add the degrees of it. Oh, and he held the world record for 28 years. He's the first person to break 47 seconds. So I can toot my horn and all that. But nah, I'm humble. I've been humble because I think I'm a better example of what an athlete would. I had a wonderful life in this sport. I'm not a millionaire and all that, but that was never my intentions. My intentions was just being able to become a better athlete. The competitiveness was the competition was really okay, especially during practice, because we would push. And even if you watch athletes really push themselves so hard in practice that you realize when they're in competition, they're just out there. I could imagine Bolt, Powell, Asafa Powell, and the Beast. What's the young man's name?
Blake. Yeah, Blake.
Blake.
Yeah.
I can imagine them in practice. They have to go hard at it, because you can see them when they get into competition. They're just as jovial, smiling, grinning, laughing, because to them it's fun. It's all execution, because they put in all the hard work. It's okay. Let's go out there and see what we can do. We can just blow the minds of everybody.
But what I'm going to do, Kevin, I'm going to come through with a nice, easy question for you. If you had a choice between your world record and Olympic gold, which one means the most?
Gold medal, the world record is just icing on the cake, to be honest with you, because like I said, I took 4th place in '88
Yeah, I've
and
watched it. Do you know what? I watched it. I rerun of it last night. And
yeah. You take when I took fourth place, and when I replayed that race in my mind, I look at all the different scenarios in which I was in during the course of that. I had no game plan. I'm going 12 steps for the first probably 7 hurdles. At least first 6 hurdles, I'm going 12. Um, I'm running with a I had a hamstring. I had a knot in my hamstring, and this is where your mind
wow.
plays tricks on me
Yeah.
on you. I remember prior to lining up in the race, knowing that I'm in a race with Edwin in that heat, and I had an injury and I had strained the hamstring the year before, at least half a year before.
Yeah.
Had a little scar tissue in there, but for the most part, I was good to go because it didn't bother me at the trials or anything like that. When I made the team, I get to the race and I freak out, and all the stress that I had went to that hamstring
Yeah.
and it knotted up. And I'll
Tension.
never forget this. When I ran the race and I'm running, I could feel the hamstring tugging when I'm really trying to put it down on the track. Able to get around the track, finish the race, take fourth place. And the crazy thing about it is when I crossed the finish line, as
Relaxed.
tight as that muscle was, as soon as I crossed the finish line, that race was over. The muscle literally opened up. And I literally, because I was thinking I was going to be walking around the track with this knot in my hamstring, like it's like
Yeah.
because the crazy thing about that is it did not happen until I got into the call room. I warmed up on the
Yeah.
practice field, did pop over drills, and then went to go sit up and rest. 20 minutes before the race, you go sit up and rest and just kind of go through your mind. And I remember, oh, it's a little pain in there, like a little soreness, and then it just kind of got tighter and tighter and tighter. But it wasn't tight enough for me to say, "Oh, I got a hamstring pull." It was
Yeah.
just like one of those things where
It's just
it was very
tension.
uncomfortable. When I
Yeah.
remember when I was pushing it, I could feel the tension in the leg. As soon as I finished the race, the muscle literally opened up. And then I was like, what did I just do to myself? And I remember, I'll never forget talking to some Olympians. They were telling me, they said, Kev, you have to treat the race like it's a track meet. You're like, he said, don't get caught up in the hype because it's all hype. When
Yeah.
you get there, that's all it's all you see, the pomp and circumstance, because you've watched the Olympic Games over the years, you see the fireworks, you see the doves and the pigeons, and you just see the pomp and circumstance of the games themselves, the
Yeah.
magnitude of it, right? But then, and you get there and you can literally lose yourself in all that. You can really get caught up and get caught up in the show and forget the why you actually got there. So 4 years later, it was okay, you made the team. All these competitors, you've raced with them over the years throughout Europe. So it's there's no mystery who your competitors are, who your competition is. All you have to do, Kevin, is get out there and execute. And I tell this story when I remember marching out into the field. We were in the car room. They line you up in the order of your lane assignment. So when you come out onto the track, you just kind of go into your lanes, strip down, and put everything in the basket. And I remember we're coming through the tunnel before we got into the field, and I remember a, a little voice was telling me, "You remember what happened in 1988? You remember what happened in 1988?" And that went through my head, and I heard the voice, my voice telling me, "You remember what happened in '88?" And I remember in a split second, I was like, "This is 1992. This is 1992. That's over with." And then I went into my 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 game plan, my game plan of how I wanted to execute the race with the step pattern that I knew that I was comfortable with doing and how I wanted to run the race. And and the key thing with that was basically there's so much hype behind the race and you may feel a certain way, but you have to do exactly what got you there and don't try to
Yeah.
deviate from the game plan. And as long as I focused on that, I was fine. And I did just that. And the beauty of it is when I remember, like I said, you see the picture of me with my smiling and all that. That was because I knew I was going to leave out of there with the gold medal. Had I won any medal, I would have been happy, you know, knowing that I didn't win a medal for 4 years prior to that. But the fact that the last 20 meters, knowing that I'm about to cross this finish line with the gold medal in the 400-meter hurdles at the 1992 Olympic Games, that was it. And then, like I said, crossing the line and then realizing that I broke the world record, I knew I was capable of running under 47 seconds. I knew that. Didn't know when it was going to happen, but I knew I was capable of doing it. But to do it in the Olympic race, I was like, oh, man. It was my coach's birthday the day before. John Smith's birthday was August 5th. But we didn't get a chance to celebrate the birthday because that night before I was on pins and needles. It's like one situation where you can't sleep in the Olympic Village or anywhere else when you got the fight on your Olympic race the next day. In your mind, the anxiety of it all. Mike Johnson had already got like stomach poisoning or something.
Yeah.
I mean, he was sick. He couldn't do his thing. So you think about teammates and Quincy had just won the gold medal and set an Olympic record in the 400 meters. We were roommates, and I'm going, wow. My roommate, not just my team, my roomie had just won the Olympic gold medal, set an Olympic record. Not that I want to outperform him, but man, what do I do? I mean, how do and I remember Quincy always, he just kept just go out there, just have, just run like how you got there. Just do we got you there and stick to that game plan and don't even, try not to do no more than that. Because he said the nature of the race, the Olympic Games, it's going to take care of itself, but you have to be ready to execute what got you there. And so I kind of said, okay, as we say now, I just stayed in my lane and did everything that I wanted to do. It really kind of was weird because I went 11 steps the very first round. So I started, and I didn't know all this at the time, but I started reflecting upon it. I remember when I ran the very first round of the Olympics, I ran 48.76. I remember that time, 48.76. And I shut down my race at the 8th hurdle and jogged in to finish the race. And I remember telling myself, I said, damn, had I kept the same momentum that I had built up during the course of that race and finished that race out, I would have broke the world record in round one. Literally, There's no doubt. I would have ran under 47 seconds in round one.
But much better in the final, though, Kevin. Much better, much more better in the final.
Much better in the final. And then I get into the second round, and it's a foot race for that because Winthrop beats me in the second round by 100th of a second. And I'm like, why am I racing? I'm telling myself, why am I racing with Winthrop? I had to tell myself, what was that race all about, Kevin? That was an ego thing.
Kevin, I know I've kept you for like forever. You've been invoicing me for about £1 million, I think.
You know what it is? It's talking athletics. I can do this forever. I mean,
do you know what, Kevin? And so could I, and I'm not even an athlete.
I think I got to go walk the dog now. He's barking.
Yes. But, Kevin, absolute pleasure. We'll catch up more soon anyway.
Definitely.
But just reach out to me whenever you need anything. It's no
I got to go join your YouTube page. I'm definitely going to do that because I'm really curious to see who you've spoken to in the past.